Hello, I'm Brian P., and welcome to Scaling the Well. Today I'd like to ask the question, are you an enabler? and I'm sure most of you will probably say, no, I'm not an enabler. I don't enable people. But I think it's a subject that's worth talking about, especially, you see on TV pretty much daily, you're hearing about someone dying or some policy that should be or shouldn't be or hasn't been done in time regarding the opioid crisis. That's something that's really big now. Obviously addiction's been talked about through the ages, but the opioid crisis right now is the main addiction subject that's in the news. And how do we deal with that? How will we deal with a family member who's going through that, who is addicted to that? How do we deal with ourselves? Because one of the things that I want to talk about on these podcasts is always about what can you do. You can only control yourself, and so you'll see like a running theme through all of this is basically when I talk about things, and sometimes I'll use examples and all kinds of things, but it's what you can do to protect yourself and protect those you love, even if you have to make harsh decisions or hard decisions, I should say. No decisions are harsh, but some are hard. So let's say, you have somebody who is an addict, and just to give like a classic example of an alcoholic, right? We learned about this in school, even in high school at times. A lot of us know alcoholics or some type of addict. Well, the one thing that I learned, and this was during a training that kind of, opened my eyes a little bit, is how powerful, it's not the substance, but the actual addiction, the actual disorder is, and how it affects everything. And so like if you have an addict in the family, and what happens is that the entire family is addicted. So it's like a disease that infects the entire family. It's almost like, like any other thing, like tuberculosis. It's just everybody in that family is infected, and it can affect other people. So when I had this great training. This is around 2011 or so, I believe, where there was a social worker from Riverside, and I wish I knew his name because I'd give him all the credit. But he was actually an ex-addict, and I think he actually ended up being a social work supervisor. Then he started doing consulting. And he kind of explained to me addiction in a way. And we're going to have to actually do a whole podcast on addiction. And I'm going to have somebody else, a guest in here speaking with me on it. But I just kind of want to point out this point that the way he explained it to me was, well, to the whole class, was that if you have an addict in the families, and that could be a parent or it could be a child. And with the opioid crisis, you see a lot of the people who are addicted are younger people. They're in their teens and early 20s. And so basically the addiction, if you were to draw a genogram, which is basically like a family tree for social workers, right? You have the parents and then the kids that the parents have. And then if they're grandparents, then the kids that the kids have, you just draw them down. Basically it looks like a family tree. But if you were to draw a genogram with an addicted family, well, actually, there's technical ways that you could draw, and they have symbols and stuff you can put in for addict. But the way that a layperson would look at it would be that the addiction would be the head of household, right? So you have the addiction at the top, and it's the mother. It would be like a combined mother and father type entity, and then everybody stems down from that. The addict would be underneath that, and then buddy would stem from the addict and their relationships, supporting the addict, which in turn, who in turn supports the addiction. So it's very interesting because he was giving an example of like, you would have, he had a kid draw a picture who was in an addicted family. Father was the addict. And then you had the mother who was constantly chasing the father. And this is a picture that I think it was drawn by like a 6-year-old. And so this child's picture, the mother's constantly chasing the father. And the father is constantly chasing the bottle. So it's sad, but it was kind of weird. It's kind of like such a very simple way to understand addiction, and in some ways to understand an enabling cycle or codependent cycle. So the addiction or whatever it is, and again, we're going to talk about how enabling doesn't always mean it's somebody who's addicted to a substance. They might just be addicted to a way of life, a way of thinking. And that can be just as destructive as addiction sometimes. So, and then he said the reason why it was important for social workers to know this, and this was how he kind of ended that little scenario, was that like 6 months later, the kid drew the picture again, and then the father was still chasing the bottle, the mother was still chasing the father, and she was dragging along the kids. And then a few months after that, it was a picture of the father chasing the bottle, the mother chasing the father, the mother dragging the kids along, and the social worker chasing after the kids. So you could see how cycles, we'll talk a lot about that in many podcasts, can just, like tuberculosis, can start affecting not only everyone in the family, but even people outside the family who have contact. So that's why a lot of people use disease models when they start talking about disorders, because they behave like diseases, even if they're diseases of attachment. So enabling itself, and which is the action, of codependence, it's something that you can see in your everyday life, and it's probably something that you've yelled or got upset about when it came to other people at least once or twice in your life, and it could be somebody your sister's dating and how your sister's doing this with you, whatever. It could be, how your parents are kind of just letting your younger sibling do whatever they want and not holding them accountable. And, they might be 30, but have never had a job, been arrested so times, but they still let them live at home rent free, So it's all, enabling kind of shows up in all types of forms. And why is it wrong to enable? So let's say you have somebody who, they're giving a person what they want. Let's say it's not even an addict. Let's just say it's somebody who just doesn't want to, participate in society. They want to sit at home and, do whatever they want to do. They don't want to get a job. And then they're going to just be living rent free, free food, free cable, free air conditioner, whatever. Well, I the first thing I would say is it's wrong because when you are an enabler, and let's say that's codependent, right? We'll call it the clinical term. When you are codependent, you have a disorder that's just as bad and just as strong within inside you as the person that's dependent on you. And let me explain that. So there's something. So like if an addict, most addicts, if they could just snap their fingers and be unaddicted to the substance that they're addicted to, they would do it. If it was like such an easy fix, they would do it. Nobody really wants to be an addict. I don't think so. I haven't met any addicts that liked being addicts. I've met a lot of addicts who've tried to not be, to go into recovery and then failed. And even ones who put forth a lot of effort and you thought they were going to make it and they just couldn't. So it's the same thing with the codependent, the enabler, because it's doing something that they know, they actually believe is wrong. I'm not going to make the judgment. They're making a judgment that it's wrong. They know that it only makes the problem worse, and something that they have defined as a problem. Right? This is not something that I have defined as a problem or their friends have defined as a problem, even though they may have. It's something that they themselves internally know as a problem, yet they're supporting it. That's what makes it wrong. So let's say it's not somebody who's supporting an addict. Let's say it's a sugar daddy. And a sugar daddy to me is not an enabler. The other person could be addicted to something or whatever, but a sugar daddy or a sugar mama, it's 2018. They have, in my opinion, they have resources and they have a goal and they're using their resources to get that goal, and they've accepted it. They don't think it's wrong. You know, if a man has resources financially and he wants a young, attractive girl, and he admits that to himself, that's what he wants. He says, hey, I'm willing to spend this money to get that. Okay. You know, to me, that's not enabling. To me, because he doesn't think that's wrong. He doesn't think he's being used. Now, there are situations that look like that, to where a man is buying a woman everything she wants, and he's not getting what he wants in return. He's getting kind of friend zoned at a class 100 level. That could be enabling, but then I wouldn't call him a true sugar daddy. I'd call him a sucker. So that's mean, but that's what I'll call him. So a lot of people get into these enabling cycles, and and I would like to, again, I always talk about empathy, because I think any of us can end up in that situation. Some of us are just more resilient, and we had better childhoods than some other people, and just different experiences in life, and maybe different, even slightly different biology. You know, some people are more, they're depressed, you know, or some people have personality disorders, and so their brain chemistry is a little different. But, you know, I think anybody, all 7 billion of us living on this rock, could have any disorder, you know, given the right circumstances. They might be extreme circumstances to get me to do what that person did, but it's not impossible. And so I always like to say, you know, none of these podcasts are about judging people and what they do. It's about recognizing the flaws that are and the tweaks that humanity needs, and how we can control them, and how you can do things, you know, because the only person you can control is yourself. And so, you know, let's try to work on that. And we're all about continuous improvement. And again, it's continuous improvement in business, continuous improvement spiritually, continuous improvement physically, and we're good to go. So back to enabling. Well, one of the things I would like to say again is it's about what's inside the enabler. That's the problem. It's not whoever they're enabling is almost irrelevant, you know, for their personal growth, right? Because that person, I've seen people who were and you can, whatever you want to call it. Let's say somebody who's a domestic violence perpetrator. Well, I've seen a few women who are domestic violence perpetrators, but I didn't follow them because it was just a case that I had, you know, when I was working. But most of the people that I've seen, well, I can't say most because I didn't count, but a lot of the people I've seen who've gotten out of that, and then who would still kind of know about their ex-partner who was abusive, would find somebody else that would take that abuse. So it's not really about the person who's being enabled. It's not, you know, the person who is an addict who needs money for drugs and needs a place to stay. If that's somebody in your life and you're the one providing that for them, if you cut out, they can find somebody else. People who are dependent are very resourceful when it comes to both manipulation and when it comes to finding people who are willing to give them the things they need. And it's shocking. You know, I find it's actually fascinating. And then I think that people who study it, you know, are studying it for a good reason, because that's a main part of human behavior. Like, how can this person who has nothing, usually a lot of these people are broke. Not all of them are attractive, you know. They may not, you know, it's not like these smooth current artists, you know, with this awesome British accent, you know, they're just kind of just charming people into doing things. No, they're people who just they know how to find certain people, and they know how to push certain buttons to get what they want. And then those people who are the enablers, you know, for whatever reason, again, it could be childhood, how they were raised. If they were raised in a family where people enable each other, then they're probably going to grow up the same way. They could be raised in a culture where, you know, the person being enabled is somebody just because of, you know, he could be the man of the house or whatever, you respect that person no matter what. So if that person gets to eat first, then then when you have food, that you serve that person first. If that first person is addicted to gambling, then he wants $20 from you. If you have it, you give it to him, because to say, hey, I'm not going to give it to you because you've already blown your entire life savings and your kid's college fund on gambling would be disrespectful. And that sounds strange, but there's situations like that. And that's even in American culture. It doesn't really matter. It's more, when I talk about culture, I talk about the culture within a family or within a group. I don't want to say, well, this applies to an entire demographic of people. Because I've known people who, everyone knows people who might be from the same demographic, yet, because of their families, they're totally different as far as their expectations of people and their actions towards other people. So I don't want to paint with a too broad a brush. But, so yeah, the enabler is the person who has something inside them that kind of compels them to support, I would say support the bad habits of someone. It's not just supporting them, because there's good reasons to support people, right? If you have a parent who is diagnosed with cancer and they're sick, and you move them into your home and you feed them, and you let them have their own room, and you're making their medical appointments for them. Well, that's not enabling. That's being a good kid. That's what you're supposed to do. That's you being a part of a family member, and you're supporting the family structure. The difference between that and enabling is that enabling erodes the family structure. So your actions are actually destroying the bonds, and you become very resentful. There's a lot of people who are dependent who were killed by their enablers because they just pushed them too far, And you'll see in enabling cycles where the enabler, even though they're submissive, have bouts of anger because they bottle everything up, and it comes out, sporadically. But, and then they go back to the way things were. They go back into the cycle. And that's part of the cycle, actually. They get angry, because, they've been giving them all their money. They've been doing this, you're just lazy. You're not doing anything to help the family. And they have a big argument. And then the next day, do you, they have breakfast ready for them, and hey, do you need some money to go hang out with your friends or whatever? And that cycle just repeats. But sometimes it does get too far, and people can get hurt. One of the ways that you can track an enabler from the outside is usually follow the money. Now, not all enabling is monetary, but when you're talking about addicts, and when you're talking about most of the people who would just have these weird personality disorders, a lot of it is money, because pretty much everything, at least in the United States, it costs something. So if they want to have a certain lifestyle, even if that lifestyle is simply, sitting at home playing video games, well, that's going to cost money. The internet costs money, this costs money, whatever. But let's say the person's an addict. One of the ways that we would try to end the cycle of enabling would be to have, one of the ways I did it, I would use meetings that were meant for something else, and I would start talking about little things that other people didn't know. And so this is an example. It's basically follow the money from a social work standpoint and not a law enforcement standpoint. So you have somebody who, and let's say you have a father, I don't know why I'm picking on men, but maybe because I'm a man, who is addicted to meth. And we've already removed his kids 2 months ago, but this guy's still testing positive. But it's like, how is he getting money for meth? And why is he, still using, and why is everybody kind of just saying that he's just hopeless? Well, I can understand why they say he's hopeless, because they're looking at it from a guy who's just, wow, you had your kids taken away and you're still not clean. But nobody wants to own up to their responsibility in it, and they don't even think they're that responsible. So what I would say is okay, well, I'd bring the whole family in. I'd bring family members in that the parents didn't even know I was inviting. I'd find grandmas and aunts and second cousins if I could. And so let's say this. Here's an example of what I would do. I would ask an uncle. So let's say the parents are young and in their 20s or whatever. So the father has an uncle. Okay, well, how often do you see him? How often do you see your nephew? And the nephew is the addict. And the uncle would say, well, I see him about, twice a month. Okay, well, what do you see him for? Oh, he stops by. Like, do you give him anything? No, I don't. He gets, I give him, he says he's hungry, and so my wife and I make him dinner, and then we give him, enough food, to take back with him to last a week, So he gets like 2 weeks of food a month from you. Like, yeah, but it's just food, and everybody needs food, right? Like, okay. And then we ask like, the aunt on his mother's side, right? Well, how often do you see him? I see him, probably maybe 2 or 3 times a month, and he needs gas money and and so I, and whatever. Okay. And so how much do you give him for gas money? Well, I probably give him maybe like $20 every time he sees me. So you give him like about $60 a month. Okay. And then you talk to, the addict's mother, and it's like, well, how often do you see him? He's like, well, I see him like all the time because I drive him around everywhere. So he doesn't have a car. No, but your sister's giving him gas money. I guess. Yeah, I didn't know. Right. And then do you give him anything? Well, I give him money for a bus pass. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I can't drive him around all the time. So I give him money for a bus pass. So if I'm not available, he could still get around and get to all the meetings that you guys, the government, all his AA meetings and his drug counseling and his therapy. He needs to get to all these things. So, yeah, I give him a bus pass because I want to make sure he gets his kids back, and you guys are giving him so much to do and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Did you know that the county provides bus passes for him and he gets one every month? No, I didn't know that. Okay. So, and you can see this, and then you talk to his cousin, how often do you see him? I just see him in the evenings because he spends the night at my house. Really? Because your sister said that, she was giving him $100 a month, just to find cheap hotels, to help him get money for that, And so it turns out that the entire family's kind of enabling him. They just didn't know the scale. They didn't know how clever an addict can be. And he actually, when you think about it, finding 5, 6 revenue streams, if you applied that to business, if you were an entrepreneur, man, you can knock it out of the park, man. You'd be so successful, you're lucky to find one revenue stream, and an addict can find like 6, 7, 8, and they have ones that are renewable, and they have ones that can lead to other revenue streams. So if your friend, had an extra place to stay, like you might use that and do whatever, and then I don't know. So never underestimate the person who's dependent, and that's one thing. But so these are people who are still kind of enabling, even though they didn't know the scale. Then you have the people who are just enabling because they're actually in the relationship with that person. They're in the same home. It could be like a girlfriend enabling a boyfriend. She's paying for everything. She's working. She's doing all this. And my stepdad, he's of Mexican descent. He said him and his friends would call them maintenidos. Yeah, they're men who are being maintained by women, and in like a very macho culture that's looked down upon, right? And but you see it, these girls who have these guys, and this guy wants to be a rock star or a rapper or whatever, but the guy's like pushing 30 or whatever, and he hasn't made any moves to do so. Doesn't even own an instrument, doesn't even own a microphone, and yet that's kind of the excuse, right? Kind of like the eternal student. Those exist too. Well, I'm a student, even though. Dude, you're 35 years old, man. You graduated like so long ago in high school, but you're still saying that you're a student, and yet you don't have a job. You're not doing anything, and your girlfriend pays for pretty much everything. And we know them, we see them. And again, if it's an understanding, it's not enabling, right? If you have somebody, let's say, you have a situation where he's a stay-at-home dad. Okay, when the mom goes out and works. All right, fine. They both know what it is. They both think it's conducive to the raising of their child to have a parent at home. And since they both understand and they both agree, it's not destroying the relationship. It's not eroding the bonds. It's not harming anyone. It's actually helping. It's when you think, or the enabler thinks that, they're doing something wrong, yet they continue to do it. And you see that over and over again. And it's kind of a simple subject, but it's hard because it gets very personal. Almost everybody has somebody, there is emotional enabling where you're just giving and giving and giving. Let's say that I'll pick on the guys again. There's a guy who he just likes women, and the girl stays with him. She knows she's being cheated on. He'll come back. He'll tell her some beautiful things, gives her a place to stay. And he goes off and he'll do what he wants to do, with whoever he wants to do it with. And yet she constantly puts up with it. And there's no end in sight. And she'll complain. Oh, this time I'm going to I broke up with him for good. Or, oh, this time he really crossed the line. If he cheats on me one more time, well, what a silly statement that is. But I've heard people say that. If he cheats on me one more time. So basically the first 4 times were okay. Those are passes, right? So you would never say that about a gun, right? If he shoots me one more time, because you don't get, no. Even if someone shot you and they didn't kill you, it'll hurt. It'll hurt physically. And for some reason, people tend to respond more to physical pain and take appropriate action than emotional pain. If I threaten somebody with physical pain, they react accordingly. But emotional pain, no. Even though it's just as damaging, you're just dying over a longer period of time. One concept I wanted to just throw out there is, can institutions enable, people? And I was thinking, let's just go big, it's controversial or whatever. There's been a lot of talk about kind of like a universal basic income. I don't know where I stand on that. I'm not for it or against it at this point. I don't know how it works. I do have certain feelings about welfare, which we would call cash aid, and how I think that it's wrong, and it's a form of enabling, and a lot of people fight for it. A lot of politicians fight for it. Don't touch the cash aid, blah blah blah. And I want to be very sensitive here because I know that there's a lot of people in need, and I'm very much for certain safety nets in society, and I do know that that. It's sometimes people end up in situations that are just desperate, and it's whether or not they could have made different decisions or not is almost irrelevant because they're in the situation now. But how can you help? But I always have this one criteria, and anybody says that they're trying to help somebody, and that goes for enablers. All enablers, let's say, whether it's somebody who's enabling their spouse, their friend, whoever, their child, and I would say the same thing to the government. Helping, so if I help somebody, and this is a good way for you to distinguish between helping and enabling. This is if there's nothing else you learn from this podcast, just pay attention to this, right? The easy way to tell if you're helping or enabling, or somebody else is helping or enabling, because they're very two different things. Just think of helping somebody cross the street. If you help somebody cross the street, that means they started on one side of the street and they ended up on another side of the street. And that's the end. Right? You're not going back and forth across the street. You're not leaving them in the middle of the street. You don't set up appointments to help them every week across the street. Unless it's an elderly parent or something like that you're walking to the store or something like that. That's a little different. Enabling is something that's ongoing with no end, and you don't even know why you're the one responsible to do it. Enabling is like, well, you help somebody. You think you're helping somebody, and it could start out with that, right? and you take them and they're in the middle of the street because and then sometimes they're back on the other side of the street. In other words, their situation isn't improving. Somebody's on drugs and you're giving them money for food, and yet they're still wasting away because they're still using drugs, and they're using most of that money for drugs, if not all of it. Are you helping them? No. You're hurting them. And you're doing it, again, if you go back to what I said about empathy in another podcast, you're doing it even though you're telling people you're helping, you're doing it from a standpoint of narcissism, because you're doing it looking at them as somebody who cannot survive without you, and you're getting an emotional high off of that. A lot of people have their dopamine receptors fire, when they do cocaine or when they hit a jackpot or, during sex. Well, what gets you high is this person needing you. So you're like an addict of emotion. You're like an emotional vampire, and that's wrong, and that's not good for you. It's not good for the person you're doing it to. That person may want to get clean. That person may want to change their life. That person may have dreams and aspirations and may have had just an epiphany, or will have an epiphany at some point to where they actually try to do meaningful change. But if you're still enabling them, it's going to be 10 times harder than if they were just on their own and kind of hit rock bottom. And I know everybody talks about addicts hitting rock bottom. An enabler will never let them hit rock bottom. Think about that. So if you can't change until you hit rock bottom, well, the enabler is the pillow. They could hit bottom, but they're never going to hit rock bottom. They always have some kind of a soft landing, and they're never really touching the ground. So that's one thing. So then back to the welfare thing. Well, can governments enable, and what do I think about welfare? Again, I'm in support of social safety nets. But when I was a social worker and I see people who are third generation cash aid recipients, like it's hard to say that, we're helping. When are they going to get to the other side of the street, and how are their children going to end up on the other side of the street if this is now part of their lifestyle? If your grandmother was on cash aid and you're on cash aid, well, what do you think your child's going to do? And people grow up in these environments where their neighbors are on cash aid, and most of the people in their school are on cash aid, and then it's kind of like, well, everybody has a life plan, right? You could have that overbearing parent that wants you to, who wasn't a former athlete and wants you to be an athlete, and you end up following in their footsteps because you think, oh, I guess that's the plan. You could have the parent who owns a restaurant, and the restaurant's doing pretty good, and the parent's telling you that you're going to take over this restaurant when you get older. Now, you might have aspirations to do other things, but you're kind of like, oh, well, this is the plan that's kind of laid out to me. Most kids end up in that restaurant. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's kind of how it is. So if you are on, cash aid, welfare, and you're now a teenager, and well, let's say your mother was on cash aid welfare, and you're now a teenager, you grew up on cash aid. Well, yeah, your life plan's kind of set out for you too, because nobody's saying that, no, this is, I don't want to say wrong, but it's limiting, and a lot of people say, well, that's, we have this whole thing about the left and right in this country and conservative versus liberal. I got to tell you, if I was a conservative, I don't consider myself a liberal or a conservative, but if I was somebody who really wanted to do away with welfare, my argument would be this. I'd be like, oh, as a middle-class person, welfare is a great investment for my tax dollars. Because welfare actually doesn't, out of this $1 of your that goes to taxes, I would say, to going to social programs, and that would include all social programs like Medicaid and CHIP and cash aid, welfare, all of it's probably maybe 10 cents out of $1, maybe 10% of that, your taxes. most of it's going to go to defense, Social Security, Medicare. Medicare and defense are the two big ones. And then, you have your Social Security taxes, but they're separate. But I guess, most of the money is not going to you think it's going to foreign aid and they think it's going to welfare recipients. And it's not. So I would say, hey, that's a great investment, because most people who are on cash aid become multi-generational people on cash aid. So the children are likely to be on cash aid too. And if that's the case, that means, one, I don't have to compete with anybody. There's a whole section of the population that I will never have to compete with for pennies on the dollar. And there is a whole portion of the generation that my children will not have to compete with. And when I say compete, I don't just mean for jobs. I mean for real estate. I mean to get into schools. I mean for spouses even. They're not going to be in the dating pool that my college-educated kid is going to be in. No, nowhere near. Yeah. So yeah, and that would be my campaign commercial if I truly wanted to get rid of it. The problem is I don't think a lot of people want to get rid of it. I think there's a lot of people who say they want to get rid of welfare that like running on that issue, and they would never actually get rid of it because it's an issue. And I think there's a lot of people who support welfare and tell people you better not touch it or else you're evil and you want to throw people out on the streets and make children starve, that really don't care about those people either. And they are basically running, if they're politicians, they're running on that fear of welfare being taken away. And they're also, they become kind of like these cultural vampires. I don't know why this is a vampire day of being able to say, hey, I'm sticking up for you because I'm making sure that you're going to, continue to receive, these benefits. And I think both of those are very cynical, wicked, machinations. I think that, first of all, I'm not somebody who's for getting rid of cash aid, but I think it should definitely be limited. And I think it should definitely, unless somebody, there's SSA and stuff, like people who have, certain disorders, like if you're disabled, disabilities. Yeah, that's a whole nother, type of person that has different needs. But I think that they should definitely limit it for most people, and they should tailor it to where I think that some people should get benefits that don't have them. Like if you're working, I would like to see working class people be able to receive a small stipend, especially if they were on cash aid and now they've gotten jobs, and have that cash aid disappear, because that keeps them in the working pool. That keeps them paying taxes. That keeps them from falling back. Those are the type of people I think it need more of a stipend than people who are doing nothing, And it's not, again, I don't have animosity to people who are doing nothing. It's just, to me, it hurts them. Like I'm looking after their best interests. I want them to have, at least, if not them themselves, like their children, to have an idea of what is possible in this world, because there's so many things that are, and I just see people who are just missing out. And it doesn't mean that they're not happy. I mean, you can be happy within a family. You can have a functioning family, but I think that potential shouldn't belong to a certain group of people. It should belong to all of us. And I don't want to get people. I want to get people addicted to opioids, and I think that's bad. A thing that's happened, again, if we want to come back for a circle to the beginning of this podcast, and denying people their potential through the drug addiction. And I think you can just as easily deny people their potential with addiction to money, which isn't even a lot of money, because people getting cash aid, we're talking, maybe like $500, depending on how, your number of kids and a number of different factors. So yeah, that's our podcast on enabling, and I have so much more to talk about, and I can go in so many different directions and go down so many different rabbit holes, but it's just something I want you guys to think about. And again, just remember that the enabler has something just as much dysfunctional in them as the person they're enabling. And just remember that if you're helping, the other person ends up on the other side of the street, and that ends. That's it. They're not in the middle of the street, and they don't end up back on the other side of the street a month later. Okay. That's an easy tool to kind of take with you to know what you're doing. And you could take this with you. Again, there's emotional enabling, not just financial. And that's the thing, again, are you on the other side of the street, or are you repeating the same cycle over and over and over again, and you're dissatisfied with it, and the other person is not really doing well with it either, but they might like it more. They think they're benefiting. So help them, help yourself, and I'll see you next time.